Children can be dismissed to Children's Church. And we're going to turn to the book of Exodus. We are starting a new series in the book of Exodus. Last year we finished the book of Genesis. And the end of the book of Genesis, all the children of Israel got sent to Egypt. Well, now, this year we're going to get them back. So, follow along as I read the first 7 verses. Now, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came, each one with his household: Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. All the people who descended from Jacob were 70 people, but Joseph was already in Egypt. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the sons of Israel were fruitful, and increased greatly, and multiplied, and became exceedingly mighty, so that the land was filled with them. They were put in God's incubator. When a baby is born prematurely, or even sometimes with just special needs, the hospital puts them in an incubator. There, the temperature is controlled. The oxygen level is controlled. Everything is done to make it as easy as possible for that struggling baby to survive and thrive. Well, God put the infant, the premature infant nation of Israel, in just such a place. Because of the work of Joseph, Egypt had an ideal political climate for the Jews. The Jews were favored even more than the Egyptians. They got the choicest grazing land in the whole country for their sheep. They got free grain. The Egyptians had to pay. When the famine extended beyond the Egyptians' cash supplies, they had to give Pharaoh their animals and eventually their land. By and by, all the residents of the land had to work for Pharaoh as tenant farmers, except for the Jews. They kept their money and their flocks and their land. Pharaoh was so grateful to Joseph for saving the nation and enriching the king that he was glad to shower favors on Joseph's family. Canaan was a land flowing with milk and honey, but it was milk and honey you had to work for. It was not the ideal place to raise a premature nation. In Egypt, the fields of Goshen were abundant with grass. Everything was handed to them without having to work for it. In Canaan, the neighbors were often hostile. The sheep had to walk for miles to find enough grass to eat. Wells had to be dug for water. Egypt was easy street. It was the perfect place to build a nation from a mere 12 families. God took 70 people and multiplied them into more than 2 million people in 430 years. During this time, the Jews mostly forgot about God. There was no law as yet. There was no organized method of worship. There was no priesthood. They were not expecting or looking for the promises made to Abraham or Isaac or Jacob. Those things may have been discussed by the parents to the children around the dinner table, but they were almost fairy tales to the average Jew. God was not present in their daily lives, but God was not absent from the world at this time. He was just working in other areas. The book of Job happened during this time. Job was not a Jew. He was a descendant of Esau. Yet he was a worshiper of God and was deemed by God the most righteous man on the entire earth. Genesis names all 70 people. In chapter 46, that left Canaan for Egypt. And we just read the first 7 verses reviewing the 12 tribes that started it all. But all good things eventually come to an end. And we read in verse 8, "Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, 'Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, otherwise they will multiply. And in the event of war, they will also join those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land.' So they appointed taskmasters over them to oppress them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they dreaded the sons of Israel. The Egyptians used violence to compel the sons of Israel to labor. And they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and at all kinds of labor in the field. All their labors which they violently had them perform as slaves." Well, a new king arose who did not know Joseph. It is impossible for us to identify this king. The historical records simply do not exist from the land of Egypt. During this time, there were no historical records kept that have ever been found. So we don't know who this king was. We don't know his name. We are left to speculate. We do know that at some point in Egypt's history, that they were conquered by a foreign ruler who then ruled Egypt. This was the start and was named the Hyksos dynasty. Foreigners ruled Egypt. Then later, the foreign rulers were overthrown and the Egyptian rulers returned. Now, much speculation has been made by Bible scholars suggesting that perhaps this first Hyksos king was the king who knew not Joseph, and that started the Hyksos dynasty. Others have speculated that it was the start of the reign of the Pharaoh who overthrew the last Hyksos ruler. That was the Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph. Perhaps it was the last Hyksos king. Because we do know that this Pharaoh was destroyed by God and all of his army in the Red Sea. Would that not have paved the way for the Egyptians to reclaim the throne? Perhaps. All we know is that he had no regard for Joseph or the Jews. And we know that he feared attack from outside the land. We know that he was almost paranoid about the fact that foreigners could come in and attack them and the Jews might side with them. So we've got to do something to curb the population. So the enslavement of the Jews and the forced hard labor was actually designed to be a birth control method. Work them so hard, they'll be too tired to reproduce. Except it just didn't work. Because this was God's nation. And Egypt was God's incubator. And God blessed the children of Israel so that they gave birth more than ever. The birth rate increased during this time. Well, the Jews had grown so large and so fast, it scared the Egyptians. The Jews were a distinct race. Now think about this. For 430 years, they lived in a country but never became part of that country. They never became Egyptian. Now, America is just about ready to celebrate its 250th birthday. In that 250 years, we have had people from every nation on earth come to this country and integrate into this country, and they are all Americans. We have people here from Scotland, but they are not considered Scots. We have people here from Ireland, but they're not considered Irish. They might be considered Irish American. We have people here from various countries in Africa, but they are just Americans today. We have people here from every nation on earth. And eventually, their children intermarry with people of a different background. But the Jews never did that. God kept them distinct. They never intermarried with Egyptians. They never, though they knew the language of the land, they still kept their own language intact, causing the Egyptians to be even more fearful because they had a language the Egyptians didn't know. They were distinct, they were different. And here's another thing. They kept their tribal distinctions intact. 430 years later, every Jew could tell you which of the original 12 he belonged to. Oh, I'm of Judah. I'm a descendant of Levi. I'm a descendant of Benjamin. They knew their tribal distinctions after all this time. It never got blurred, it never got forgotten. And even Joseph's two sons were adopted into the land by Jacob, adopted into the family. So now you don't just have 12 tribes of Israel, you actually have 13. And whenever you see a listing in the Scripture of the 12 tribes of Israel, somebody gets left off. And it's different every time. The 12 tribes of Israel are actually 13. And so whenever you list 12, somebody gets left off. There were 12 apostles. But then the apostle Paul came on the scene, and he saw the Lord. He met all the requirements of an apostle, and he was called by Jesus himself, and so he was the 13th apostle. We have the 12 apostles, but there's actually 13. Now, with the paranoia that existed with the new Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, this expanded birth rate of the people caused great fear. And so he had to deal with it. The hard labor, plan number 1, didn't work. So we read in verse 15, then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. This is plan B. One of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth, and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, and let the boys live? And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get there. Oh. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Now, plan B doesn't work. So Pharaoh comes up with plan C. Now, before we get to plan C, I want to just make mention of the fact that the midwives lied to Pharaoh, and God blessed them. But you need to understand that God didn't bless them because they lied. God blessed them because of their faithfulness. They trusted Him, they feared Him, they worshiped Him, and they would not do something contrary to His wishes. So God blessed them. Tamar lied to Judah in order to get him to father a child by her. She was a righteous woman who had been lied to by Judah, whose responsibility it was to provide her with a husband from one of his sons, and he refused to do it. And God blessed her. And God chose her son from Judah to be in the line of Christ. Judah had other sons, But God chose Tamar's son, and God blessed her for her faithfulness, not for her deceit. Rahab lied to the king to protect the two spies from Israel. God blessed her. She did it because she knew that God, the God of the Israelites, was the true God. He could do things that no other false god could do. And because of her firm belief in that God, she protected those spies, and it entailed lying. God blessed Rahab, not because she lied, but because she was faithful. And God allowed her to marry a Jew, not just a Jew, but an ancestor to Christ. And Rahab was included in the line of Christ. God blesses faithfulness. Well, plan C comes about in verse 21, or in verse 22. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you are to throw into the Nile, but every daughter you are to keep alive. The entire nation got the command, no Jewish boy shall live. All of you see to it that if a Jewish baby is born male, he gets thrown into the Nile. Well, what's in the Nile? Crocodiles. They weren't just drowned, they were devoured. Pharaoh knew that would take care of it. And if this plan had been allowed by God to continue, it would have brought about the annihilation of the Jewish nation. It was the law of the land. But the Hebrew midwives disobeyed that law, and God blessed them. It was the law of the land, but Moses' mother would disobey that law, and God blessed her. And God used her baby boy to become the deliverer of the Jews. And there were many others hidden by their mothers, so that Pharaoh's drastic law did not come about. I want you to understand that there is much wickedness and evil in our world today. We see it on every hand. We see people who hate law enforcement and hate the people that administer the laws of the land. We see wickedness in high places. We see government officials who take graft. We've seen corruption on every hand. Well, I want you to understand that it's nothing new. Just As surely as there is a God in heaven, there is also a devil prowling this earth. And his plan is to disrupt all of God's plans. And it has been that way since the Garden of Eden. It was the devil who tried to annihilate the Jewish race in Egypt. Satan will work through willing government leaders. And so we have seen throughout the ages leaders of countries being Satan's greatest agents. Hitler tried to annihilate all the Jews, and he killed a lot of them. But they still survive because of God's hand. Well, it is not just Jews that the devil hates. It is all God's children, Christians as well. It may come for you someday. The devil's plan may work out against you because we are told in the scriptures that evil will get worse and worse before Jesus comes. It may be that you've been watching on television angry demonstrators getting in the face of ICE agents. Well, the day may come when an angry mob may be in your face because you're a Christian. Because the devil hates you. You might as well just mark it down. And just as he worked in Egypt through a Pharaoh that didn't know Joseph and didn't know God, so he can work today. But in the same manner, the God who took 70 people and magnified them into over 2 million people is still alive and well today. What insignificant thing do you have that you could give to God and allow him to multiply and magnify? Do you have a meager checking account? Would you trust God to learn to be a giver? Or are you going to go through life as a hoarder? Well, God said, "Give, and it shall be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, and running over." It's like sowing a crop. The more you sow, the more you reap. Will you learn to trust God with your finances and become a giver? Learn to trust God? Well, I guarantee you, He will take what little you faithfully give and will magnify the return. He promised that. So it's important that we learn from the book of Exodus the lessons that God wants us to see of His work, His power, His glory, His majesty, working with this baby nation and with a king that would not give his slaves up. That we will see God working in marvelous and miraculous ways throughout this entire book. Be prepared to learn about the God who loves you and the God you serve. And you will see His work in majesty and power in marvelous ways throughout this book. Well, that's chapter 1. That's the beginning. And now, I'm going to shut down a little bit early, but Mrs. Weber has an announcement to explain to you how the birthday